Okay, hello again, girls. We're now looking at the next PowerPoint, which I believe is PowerPoint number 7 on CC4 production costs and revenue. So we're going to start on page 50 in your booklets, and basically we're going to start to look at revenue specifically, and how price elasticity of demand might affect revenue. Okay, so it's quite an important principle for you to understand, and this is where we're looking at, in this instance, on page 50, we're looking at price makers, revenue curves, and PED models. So a price maker rather than a price taker is a price maker is somebody who can influence, a firm who can influence the price of its goods and services, and is able to set prices themselves. Okay, so this looks quite a complicated slide, but you'll see as we go through it, it's relatively straightforward to understand, or let's hope it is anyway. Okay, so there are two things that are being shown there. Okay, you've got a total revenue and quantity curve for a business, and then we've also got price and quantity for the individual goods that particular company are selling. So what we've got to do is be able to understand what is going on in these different diagrams. So you can see in this instance we've got a total revenue curve, and we've got a number of different levels of quantity, and obviously dependent on the amount that we sell and the amount that we're selling for that particular good for, that is obviously then going to influence a range of things. So in this instance, one of the things that we need to bear in mind is that if we've got, depending on what our price elasticity of demand is, that is going to have an effect on revenue. Okay, because clearly if price changes and then the number of people who want to buy our goods or service change, then that clearly is going to affect total revenue. So obviously the link is to calculate your total revenue, it's the selling price that you choose to charge times by the number of units that you're going to sell. Now all we've done really in this instance is to show how changes might affect, changes in total revenue might be affected by PED, by the different types of price elasticity of demand. Okay, now in this instance, again, we've got to remember that if we're trying to sales maximize or profit maximize, then clearly we are going to keep producing stuff until the point at which marginal revenue is going to equal marginal cost, particularly if we're a profit maximizer. Now, if we're a price maker, we are likely to be a profit maximizer too, because we're in a position to influence the market, and we are probably going to try to achieve profit maximization. If we assume that to be the case in this instance, that's probably going to be a good thing to demonstrate. Okay, so the first things first, then let's just take a look at how we're going to go about answering these questions. So you've got on page 50, you've got questions 1 to 5 at the bottom of page 50, and then you've got a couple of charts which actually, as we go through the slides, hopefully it will start to make some sense. Okay, so have a look at the two slides, or the two graphs rather, and take a look at what you think is being shown there. We've got a total revenue curve, and as you can see, it goes from 0. If we're selling no quantities of our goods, then we have no revenue, and it goes up and up and up to the point at which we get to the point at which our total revenue starts to fall. Okay, so that's around about, we don't exactly know what that figure is at the moment, but it's certainly going to be higher than 1200. We might be able to work that out when we actually take a look at some of the other things that aren't included yet. And as we go through the process, we will add to these charts so that it makes it a bit more sense. Okay, now you should be able to make a few assumptions about this, but clearly one of the things we're going to do is build this up as we go. So we're going to look at different levels of PED, what the different levels of PED are, price elasticity of demand. I'm going to come back to that and look at that in a minute. Whoops, gone one too quickly. So in this instance, then we've got to see how in the first question is at what level of output is marginal revenue equal to 0. Okay, so remember, marginal revenue is the extra revenue that we achieve by selling an extra item. Now, in this instance, clearly, as we can see, there is a point at which marginal revenue stops increasing. Okay, and it reaches a certain point on our revenue total revenue graph. Okay, now the other thing that we can also do when we start to look at this is we can also see how that might be affected by price changes. Okay, and remember how to calculate price elasticity of demand. It's the percentage change in price divided by the percentage change in quantity demanded. Okay, so in this instance, that's quite an important principle to remember. Okay, so let's take a look at this and move forward on that basis then. Okay, so first and foremost then, if I want you to take a look at the information that you've been provided and also just have a go at trying to answer those 5 questions. Now, you might find some of those slightly tricky, but have a go in the first instance yourself. You might need to look at your PED notes, your price elasticity of demand notes, which I believe was in CC3, your CC3 booklet. So you might need to refresh your memory on how to calculate PED, and then we can take a look and see how this all works out. So I'd suggest you stop the PowerPoint at this point, have a go at doing that, and then when we come back to look at the PowerPoint, we can see how this whole thing works out. Okay. So welcome back. So let's take a look then at the first question. At what level of output is marginal revenue 0? Well, in this instance, as you can see, that value is going to be 25. Okay. Now, you can see at this point, as we've said before, marginal revenue, i.e. the revenue that you gain by producing another item, is not going up. So at this point here, let's take a look and hopefully you can see the cursor. At this point here, then the revenue is actually starting to fall. So our marginal revenue must be at 0 at that point. Okay, so at this point you can see you can go down from here, from the point here, and actually draw in where that item is. It's at 25. Okay, so essentially the level of output is at 25 when we reach that point. Okay, so once we've sold 25 units, we are actually starting to, our marginal revenue is actually at 0. We're not actually going to add any more to that. Okay, so if we then take a look at the next thing then, where in this instance you can see that at that price or that quantity, the price is at 50. So if you, again, using the information that is provided to you here, we've seen that the revenue, the quantity rather, is at 25, and in this instance the selling price is going to be at 50. So given that we've got that information, okay, and now actually we've been asked to look at how to calculate PED as price falls from 80 to 60. Okay, so in this instance we got a price falling from 80 to 60. Okay, so we can see on our chart down here we've got original price of 80 going down to 60, so we should be able to calculate the percentage change in price, and then obviously we've then got to take a look to see what has happened to total revenue as the price has dropped over this range. Well, clearly, as this has fallen, as the price has fallen, so the amount that's been produced, that's been sold, has increased. Okay, and as you can see, relatively straightforward instance in this case where we've actually got a value of 10. So we've got a quantity of 10 that we've sold at the price of 80. When the price goes down to 60, we have sold another 10. So effectively, we've got 100% increase in the amount that we've sold. So in this instance, you can see that when we actually start to draw in some of these other figures, you can, and we've calculated the different percentage changes here too. Okay, so clearly, if we've got an original price of 80 and it's gone down to 60, we've got a 25% fall in price. And in this case, at that price change, we've actually had 100% increase in the amount that people have bought. So it's gone from 10 to 20. So in this instance, very simply, you can see that we've got a plus 100. So we've got the percentage change in quantity divided by, in this case, the percentage change in price. I think when I mentioned the PED value, I got that around the wrong way when I mentioned it just previously, so I do apologise for that. So in this instance then, we've got a 100% increase in quantity demanded, and just a 25% increase or decrease in price. And in that case, clearly our PED has actually fallen. Sorry, not our PED is 4, the value is 4, and so our total revenue has actually increased. Now we could calculate that, but in this instance we can actually look that in our first case we've got a price of 80, we've got 10 being demanded, so with that essentially is going to give us 800 pounds worth of revenue. When we dropped our price to 60, but now we've got 20 sold, well, that clearly goes up to 1200. So in that instance, where we got a price fall, significant price fall, but we've got a significant price elasticity, then in this instance, clearly the total revenue will go up. But if we take a look at the next example then, where we're going to look at to see how PED, calculating our PED when our price has fallen from 40 to 20. In this instance, our price was at 40 and we were actually selling 30 units. When we drop to 20, in this instance, whoops, I keep going a bit too far on these things that I'm bringing into the to the items here. So in this instance, then we've got PED, or the price falling from 40 to 20, so that's a 50% fall in our price, and we've got a 33% increase in the amount that we will sell. Okay, so in this instance, again, significant difference here, where effectively we've got a 50% fall in price, but only a 33% increase in our in the amount ordered or bought. And in this instance, then the change effectively is a 33% increase in the number sold, divided by the 50% fall in price. And clearly in that instance, our total revenue in that scenario would actually fall. And again, you could calculate that in the way that we did previously. Okay, so if we then take a look at some of the other items that we've added in as we've gone, you can see that at the point here on our graph, okay, our price elasticity of demand is higher than 1. Okay, and so anywhere between these areas here, you can see that the change in price, the percentage change in price, is accompanied with a significantly larger percentage change in the number of items bought. Okay, if we then take a look at some of the other, so if we look at question number 4, what is the value of PED when P is 100? So when our price is 100, okay, effectively what we've got is a perfectly elastic scenario, haven't we? Okay, so if at 100 we've sold nothing, but clearly as there's any change in price, that is then going to have a significant change in the amount of quantity demanded. So at 100, that would be perfectly elastic. If we then take a look at the value of PED when price is 0, well, clearly in that case it's perfectly inelastic. Okay, so if there is going to be no change at all in that situation. Okay, now in terms of how we might be able to summarize that, and that might seem a little bit complicated, but what I suggest you do, guys, is just have a quick look at the slides. These slides are obviously on Teams, and if you just need to look at the builds to just see how that all works, then obviously just to take a bit of time over that, but all that information is provided in those graphs. Okay, so if we're going to then summarize that, okay, you'll see on page 51 we're looking at the impact of total revenue on total revenue of price elasticity of demand. Okay, so in this scenario then, okay, if we've got a what if and some impacts on quantity demanded and the revenue achieved. So we're just going to run through each one of these. Now, again, what I'd like you to try and do is, and again, this might need you to go and take a look at your information on PED again, but in this instance, we've got a scenario of where we've got an elastic price elasticity of demand, so it's greater than 1, and a firm decides to lower its price. So the impact on revenue is going to be it's going to be two things. With the quantity demanded, if we've got a lowering of the price and we've got elastic demand, the quantity demanded is going to go up, and so the total revenue will also go up. If we take the second example, where in this case we've got we've got elastic demand, so our PED is greater than 1, but the firm chooses to raise its price. So in that situation, the quantity demanded will fall because we've got some elasticity of demand. We've got elasticity of demand that's greater than 1, and so total revenue would also fall as a result. Okay. Now, if we then take a look at PED being inelastic, where it's less than 1 and the firm chooses to lower its price, well, in that situation, the quantity demanded will probably go up by an amount, okay, but not a huge amount, and as a result of that, the total revenue that it will generate, because we've lowered our price, would fall. Okay, so quantity demanded would still go up by a small amount, but in that instance, total revenue would fall. Let's take a look if there's an inelastic situation and the firm raised its price. Well, in that case, the quantity demanded might actually go down, but the total revenue would actually increase. Okay, so where we've got inelastic, so if we get a change in price, then the quantity demanded, if we raise our price, we're still going to probably get a slight impact on that, not a huge one, but the quantity demanded will fall, but the total revenue is likely to go up because the fall in the number of people choosing to buy is actually outweighed by the extra total revenue that is generated. If we then take a look at PED being unit elastic, where it equals 1, and the firm chooses to either raise or lower its price, well, basically the quantity demanded is going to fall, but the quantity could rise or fall, depending on whether they're raising or lowering the price, but the total revenue would stay the same where we have unit elasticity. Okay, let's take a look at another scenario then, where in this case you're given some information. So you're being told that the PED is 4, so we've got elastic demand, and the firm chooses to lower its price by 15%. Well, to calculate that, clearly, if you remember what your PED formula is, you've got your PED, you've got the change in price, the 15% change in price, and in that scenario, basically, the quantity demanded would increase by 60%, and so total revenue would increase too. Let's take a look at, in this case, a slightly less elastic scenario, and firms choosing to raise their price by 4%. In this instance, the quantity demanded is going to fall by 6%, and so total revenue would actually also fall, okay, on the basis of the information that we've been given. If we then take a look at the last but one example, the PED in this case is 0.2, so it's inelastic, and a firm chooses to lower its price by 20%. So again, using the PED formula, you should be able to calculate that the quantity demanded in this scenario actually goes up a bit, not by a huge amount, 4%, but in this instance, total revenue is going to fall. And then if we take the last example where PED is again inelastic but 0.4, but the firm chooses to raise its prices by 30%. In that case, the quantity demanded will actually fall by 12%, but as we can see, our total price has been raised by 30%, so total revenue would actually increase as a result. Okay, that's quite a good table to sort of spend a bit of time on, and those two pages, page 50 and 51 in your CC4 booklet, might need a little bit of time to look at PED, do a bit of revision on PED to make sure you understand it and can remember it and can get it around the right way in terms of the calculation, and also just make sure that you understand the rationale and reasons behind it. I think once you go through it step by step, it's reasonably straightforward. Okay, so let's take a look at a question then on the next page, on page 52. And I'm going to move me down here a bit to make it slightly easier for us to see the question. So in this case, you've got a situation where PED is a multi-choice example on page 52, and you've got a total revenue curve showing a pizza delivery company operating at point A. Now, that point A, as you can see on the total revenue curve, is at the highest point of total revenue. Okay, so total revenue has climbed to a certain point of output, which is A, and at that point we've got to demonstrate what we understand that is showing us. Okay, so there are a number of options where A is where MC equals MR, marginal cost equals marginal revenue. B is where average cost equals average revenue. C is where marginal revenue equals 0, and D is price equals marginal cost. And then the last question, or last option, is it being productively efficient? Well, in this instance, what we'll see is that the answer is C. Okay, so C is where marginal revenue equals 0. Now, actually, if we look back at the stuff that we looked at on page 50, you can see that actually is at the same point where we've got a highest point of revenue, total revenue, but at that point, clearly, we are actually then starting to foot. So the point is, and just to explain, the only reason that it can be C, part of the only reasons why it can only be C, is that we don't know anything about any costs. We've only been given information on revenue. Haven't been told anything about cost there. So in some instances, you can see in some instances it can't be A or B, because we're talking about marginal cost and average cost. We're also talking about cost in the answer to D, which is marginal cost, and we can't tell whether we're being productively efficient because we can't see how much profit we're making. We're only being given information on revenue. So in this instance, in this case, we know that total revenue is maximised when its tangent is flat. So essentially, where the gradient equals the marginal revenue, that actually equals 0. Okay, so that basically is the answer to that question. Okay, so we've covered now PED. We've also covered or revised PED, and also looked in a little bit more detail at the way in which marginal costs and total revenue curves, etc., work. And we're now going to move on to look at the next bit, which is adding to look at things along the lines of profit, and how some of the other things that we talked about actually affect profit. Okay, so in this instance, the PED at that particular point on page 52 is at -1. If you remember, when you looked at the information on page 50, the answer to question 52 is the PED at that particular point is -1. Okay, so let's take a look then at the next section, where we're starting to take a look at profit. Now, in terms of what you're going to need to understand, we've talked quite a lot about revenue and costs, but now we're going to move on to take a look at profit. But I think actually what I'm going to do is stop there, and we'll actually introduce this in the next PowerPoint. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. As I said, we'll look at profit as a separate item, and we'll cover that in the next PowerPoint. Okay, so thanks for listening again, and we'll catch up soon.